Cairo is not easily impressed. By 1324, the city has seen sultans, crusaders, and caravans from every corner of the Islamic world march through its gates. But nothing quite like this. From the west, across the desert, comes what looks like a moving city. Thousands of attendants and soldiers in fine cloth, servants leading horses and camels, musicians beating drums and blowing horns as dust rolls up behind them. And on the backs of those camels are leather sacks stuffed not with grain or spices, but with gold dust, not coins, not jewelry, raw, glittering wealth. At the center rides a man in embroidered robes, calm and self-possessed, as if all of this is just business as usual. This is Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali, a West African kingdom many in Cairo had barely heard of before this moment. Over the weeks that follow, Musa spends, donates, and trades so much gold that people begin to notice changes in the markets. Moneylenders grumble, merchants talk, chroniclers jot down stories of a king so rich his generosity bends the value of gold itself. Years later, people in the region will still trace price changes back to that time the king of Mali came through. Centuries after his death, another label will fix itself to his name: the richest person in history. But what did rich mean for a 14th century African emperor? And how do you compare his world to ours? To answer that, we need to go back to where his power came from, the land of Mali, before anyone had heard of Mansa Musa. In the 13th century, a ruler named Sundiata Keita pulled together a number of smaller kingdoms and the remnants of the older Ghana Empire to form something new, the Mali Empire. It sat in a remarkably fortunate position. To the north lay the Sahara, with its salt and copper mines and caravan routes leading to North Africa and the Mediterranean. To the south lay gold-bearing regions like Bambouk and Bouré. Through the middle ran the Niger River, giving life to farms, cattle, and towns. That geography was wealth. North-south caravans carried slabs of salt, textiles, metal goods, and beads down into West Africa. On their return journey, they headed back across the desert loaded with gold, ivory, cola nuts, and enslaved people. Mali's rulers understood that whoever controlled the routes, the river crossings, and the markets controlled the flow of money. The empire developed rules that kept that power close to the throne. Gold nuggets, for example, were reserved for the Mansa alone. Ordinary people traded in gold dust, carefully weighed out for daily use. Taxes and customs duties clipped a share of every load that moved through imperial territory. Local rulers paid tribute in goods and people. Over time, a steady stream of value flowed toward the capital. By the early 1300s, West Africa was one of the world's major sources of gold. While much of Europe struggled with coin shortages, Mali was known, at least to traders and mapmakers, as a place where gold was abundant and kings were rich. Musa didn't create that system, he inherited it, but what he did with it turned him into a legend. Even the story of how he came to power is wrapped in a kind of mythic scale that fits the rest of his life. According to an account he later gave to an Egyptian official, Musa wasn't born king. He served as deputy to a previous Mansa who became obsessed with exploring the Atlantic Ocean. That ruler, Musa said, sent out a fleet of ships to see what lay beyond the western horizon. When only one ship returned, reporting an endless current and the disappearance of the others, the Mansa decided to lead a second, even larger expedition himself. He left Musa in charge. The fleet never came back. With the throne effectively empty, Musa became Mansa in his own right. Whether every detail of that story is true or not, it tells us something important. The Mali Empire had grown strong enough to launch huge, risky expeditions across an unknown ocean and survive the loss. For Musa, it meant stepping into power over a multi-ethnic empire stitched together by trade, tribute, and religion. Mali's rulers had long engaged with Islam, especially in court circles and trading towns, where knowing Arabic and Islamic law helped them connect with partners in North Africa and the wider Middle East. Musa went a step further. He was not just a ruler who tolerated Islam. He was a visibly devout Muslim. And in the early 1320s, he decided to prove it in the most public way possible, by going on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is expected to attempt at least once, if they are able. For an emperor, the Hajj could never be a quiet personal retreat. It was a diplomatic and economic statement. In 1324, Musa set out across the desert toward Mecca. Contemporary writers in Cairo and beyond describe a caravan so large it's hard not to think some numbers were inflated. Thousands of people, including officials, guards, servants, and enslaved men and women. Dozens upon dozens of camels, each carrying heavy loads of gold dust, and a long tail of baggage, animals, and supplies stretching over the sand. When this moving kingdom entered Cairo, it made a lasting impression. Musa spent several months there, meeting local elites and the representatives of the Mamluk Sultan. He bought supplies for the rest of his journey. He gave generous gifts to officials. He donated to the poor, to scholars, and to religious institutions. And almost everywhere he went, he paid in gold. Local observers claimed that the sheer volume of gold he poured into the city pushed prices down, making the metal less valuable than before. Whether that effect was as dramatic or long-lasting as they later remembered is debatable, but the perception mattered. For people living at the time, it was proof that somewhere in the interior of Africa there was a ruler who could treat gold the way other kings treated grain. From Cairo, Musa continued to Mecca, completed the pilgrimage, and then turned back toward his own empire. But he didn't simply retrace his steps home. Along the way, he recruited. Musa invited scholars, jurists, and architects to join him in Mali. Among the most famous names associated with this period is Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, an architect from Andalusia, who, according to tradition, helped design new mosques and palaces on Malian soil. Whether every building credited to him was truly his work or not, there's no doubt Musa used his wealth to import talent and expertise. On his return, he folded key cities like Timbuktu and Gao more firmly into Mali's orbit and poured money into them. Timbuktu, perched near a bend in the Niger and a major stop on trans-Saharan routes, benefited especially. Under Musa and his successors, it grew into a significant center of Islamic learning. Mosques were built or expanded, madrasas were funded, libraries slowly filled with handwritten manuscripts on law, theology, grammar, science, and poetry. For students and scholars from across the region, Timbuktu offered not just trade, but education. Musa's building projects weren't limited to religious prestige. By investing in stone and mud brick structures, in markets, and in officials trained in Islamic law, he was anchoring his empire culturally as well as economically. Gold dug out of the ground was being converted into something harder to melt down: institutions and reputations. So how do we think about his wealth in modern terms? A big part of the problem is that people want a single number. You'll see claims online that, adjusted for inflation, Musa was worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Those figures are guesses stacked on top of guesses. We don't have detailed records of Mali's budgets or mine outputs. We don't know exactly how much gold was under his direct control at any given time. And even if we did, translating the economic power of a medieval emperor into modern dollars is a bit like asking how many smartphones a Roman legion was worth. What we can say is this: the Mali Empire controlled a huge share of the old world's accessible gold supply at a time when gold was absolutely central to international trade and currency. As Mansa, Musa had legal and practical authority over that flow. He could tax it, hoard it, redistribute it, or show it off in the streets of Cairo. When he traveled, his spending could wobble prices in one of the most important cities in the Islamic world. That's not a private fortune in the way we use the term now, but it is an extraordinary concentration of economic power. His contemporaries didn't try to put a number on it. They reached for language instead. Exceptionally wealthy, inconceivably rich. When European mapmakers in the 14th century drew the famous Catalan Atlas, they placed a crowned black king in West Africa holding a golden orb, with a caption explaining that this ruler was the richest in the region because of the gold from his land. For them, Mansa Musa was not a spreadsheet. He was an icon of abundance. Like all empires, Mali's golden age faded. After Musa's death, usually dated to the mid-1330s, his successors faced the familiar problems of succession disputes, ambitious rivals, and changing trade patterns. Over the following century, the balance of power in the region shifted. The Songhai Empire rose, seized key cities like Timbuktu, and took over many of the trade routes that had once made Mali rich. But Musa's image endured. In modern times, he has become a symbol on several levels. For people across Africa and the diaspora, he represents a pre-colonial history of power, scholarship, and prosperity that is often missing from school textbooks. For economists and historians, he's a case study in how resource wealth, in this case gold, can be gathered and projected through a state. For journalists and list makers, he's an irresistible bit of click-worthy trivia, the richest man who ever lived. The truth is more interesting than the meme. By any reasonable measure, Mansa Musa was one of the most powerful and resource-rich rulers of his era. He sat on top of an empire that controlled the flow of gold in a world built around that metal. His spending and his piety reached across deserts and seas. His investments in cities and learning left cultural footprints that outlasted his political system. But trying to compress all of that into a dollar figure misses the point. His story isn't about who would win in some imaginary contest with today's billionaires. It's about how, long before stock exchanges and central banks, wealth could be mined from the earth, marched across a desert on camelback, sprinkled through the streets of a foreign capital, and turned into mosques, manuscripts, and a legend so bright that, centuries later, we still see its glow. Somewhere at the center of all of that, riding quietly in a sea of gold and dust, is a man from Mali, whose real fortune was not just what he owned, but what his world allowed him to command.